Sticking the ending on the big or small screen can be the very difference between your labour of love being the next hottest thing or a steaming hot pile of garbage. If you don't believe me, just ask those lads who did Game of Thrones. Hello, my name's Tommy and I'm delighted to welcome you to Podcast Assemble, where we're going to be dealing with movie endings here. So, spoilers for all of these? Sort of implied. Now, it could be argued that a movie's ending is its closing statement, and often what the audience is left with can make or break how warmly it's received. Take, for instance, one of my favourite movies, John Carpenter's The Thing. After a long, hard-fought battle, the movie closes with the remaining survivors, Kurt Russell's MacReady, sharing a drink with Keith David's Childs. Both physically and emotionally exhausted, the scene leaves the audience with more questions than answers, as the two size each other up, neither knowing if the other is the thing or not. In comic book movies, this is of course no different. For every Thanos snapping out half of existence, there is, whatever the hell Thor Love and Thunder's ending was? In short, you better get it right, or the court of public opinion can sink your movie like that. So let's talk. Here are an arbitrary number of alternate Marvel movie endings that could have changed everything. Number 1, Blade 1998. Oh ho, you thought this was going to be all about MCU movies? Looks like you fell for one of my classic pranks. Arguably the movie that begun the trend of filmmakers taking comic book properties seriously, Blade was a sensation when it hit theatres. So much so that the character in the comics actually morphed into the badass we all know and love today. Before he was just look at this. Look at that ruff! Theatrically, the kick-ass Wesley Snipes starring action flick ended with our titular hero defeating the bad guy and taking his war against the vampires to Russia, where we see him continue his mission. However, there is an alternate ending in which Blade and his new sidekick, Karen, emerge into the daylight and spot a shadowy, brooding figure in the distance, cloak billowing around him. Now that in itself doesn't sound super interesting, admittedly, but when you find out that the shadowy figure was originally intended to be none other than Dr. Michael Morbius, the living vampire, the scene gets a whole new perspective. Not least because Jared Leto would have been, barely making bad music in 1998, let alone making bad movies.
I am Venom.
Hang on a minute. Jared Leto was born in 1971. He's 50! Maybe he really is a vampire. Cool side note, this movie actually has an alternate final fight scene as well, where the most 90s character, Deacon Frost, turned into a blood tornado for some reason. Go check it out, I'll wait. Number 2, Captain Marvel. Okay, fine, I'll do one from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The MCU is no stranger to rewrites and character changes on the fly. Take Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, for instance. That film went through many iterations of potential cameos before settling on what we inevitably got, with rumours spanning as far as potentially including Tom Cruise's Iron Man. The Brie Larson-helmed Captain Marvel was no different. The ending we got saw Carol Danvers flying off into space with her new Skrull comrades to help them find a new home, a thematically and emotionally poignant moment which closed out her first solo story nicely. However, in an interview, editor Debbie Berman said that in an early draft of Captain Marvel, the ending of the film might have been very different, with the team even going as far as mocking up concept art. This ending simply saw Danvers peace out and fly off into space solo, leaving us with this jarring and ultimately overly ambiguous ending. Not sure how I feel about this one. Captain Marvel just disappearing into the cosmos feels needlessly janky and would have changed the whole vibe of the ending. You know, what I said in the intro. Luckily for us, Bremen spotted this and managed to course correct. Number 3, Spider-Man Far From Home. Spider-Man Far From Home was for the most part a completely serviceable MCU outing, with the titular hero taking a break from being a friendly neighborhood hero to ply his trade on the streets of Venice, London and the likes. As the final movie of Phase 3, and the first post-Tony's sacrifice, aside from the introduction of the fan favourite Mysterio as a villain, would have likely been a pretty unremarkable entry into the franchise. Except that ending. After the dust settles and Peter finds himself back in New York, living his best life, his whipping is suddenly interrupted by a blogcast being transmitted to the whole city, in which J. Jonah Jameson blindsides the hero by revealing his secret identity to the world. the ending had huge implications for the wider MCU and Peter's story arc, setting up the momentous plot in No Way Home, and in many ways, the whole multiversal saga itself. We covered No Way Home on our podcast, Podcast Assemble. Go check us out on your podcast platform of choice. But Tommy, I hear you cry. This video is about alternate endings. And yes, you'd be right. This actually is an alternate ending. After the film was released, the writers revealed that in an early version of the script, the huge reveal was originally going to happen as part of the final Battle of London, with a number of options considered, including Mysterio tricking Peter into revealing his true identity. Not really difficult, I mean, he, pretty much will tell anyone.
I'm Peter, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're using your made-up names. I'm SpiderMan, then.
Another draft of Peter sacrificing his identity in a move which loosely mirrors his comics counterpart in the Civil War arc, in which he does it for the greater good. And I can imagine this version of the event being somewhat similar, though it would rob us of that emotional gut punch we had enduring all the way up to No Way Home coming out, in which we got some sort of resolution. Number 4, X-Men The Last Stand. X-Men The Last Stand has an alternate ending. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Oh, you waited for me to elaborate. Righto. X-Men The Last Stand was not a good movie. It butchered ideas, threw years of spanning comics arcs at the wall like an angry toddler. Just wasn't good. It was by far the weakest of the franchise. The ending we got saw Jean Grey's Dark Phoenix persona defeated all too easily, and the removal of pivotal characters such as Cyclops early on meant we missed out on a large part of what made the comics, and some might say the 1990s cartoon, great. The personal stakes. The Brett Ratner directed third X-Men outing had no less than 3 alternate endings. One where Beast returns to head the Xavier Institute, another where Rogue gets to keep her powers, and another where Logan heads back to the original tavern from the series to grab a lonesome beer. To be honest, I thought the film was crap, so who cares if they tried to mess it up further, Number 5, Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame is in many ways the quintessential superhero redemption movie, seeing the culmination of stories of heroes we'd followed for over a decade, none more poignantly than Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark. The series began with the brash, bold, billionaire playboy philanthropist being young, rash, and...
You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
Endgame crescendoed Tony's story, leading to him making the ultimate sacrifice to defeat Thanos. I still can't even. But what if I told you we almost had a very different farewell to Iron Man? Since Endgame dropped on Disney+, there has been a plethora of new information. One which caught most people's attention was an alternate ending to Endgame, in which we see presumably the soul of Tony Stark going into a mysterious void, where he gets to meet and have a conversation with the grown-up version of his daughter, who we all remember he loves 3000, in an interesting, if not odd moment. And it raises all kinds of questions about the afterlife or even how the Soul Stone works. But mostly, it takes away much of the finality of the ending. I'm not really sure how I feel about this one. But what we want to know is, what do you think? Would you have liked to have seen Tony meet his daughter in the afterlife? Which Marvel or even general movie endings do you think would have made the biggest difference to the final film? Let us know in the comments below, and I might come back to this in future. And while you're there, feel free to drop us a like, share, and subscribe. We also have that podcast I've been banging on about, Podcast Assemble. Why not join us for some more geek content? Thanks for popping by. Tally ho!